My mentor's uncle was killed by the CIA. This is not like me making this up. This is in Wikipedia. It's well-documented history. This happened long before I was born, but around the time my dad was born. We'll get back to that. That's important, but not right now. So, Takumi Lumumba Kasongo was my mentor in college, and I went in with a bunch of Pell Grants and scholarships, and I wasn't really thinking of even going to college. I went to an FFA-based, like, agricultural program for high school, so I only took, like, a few classes in the public school I was in. I'd written college off, basically, but I was the vice president of the FFA chapter as a sophomore. And so this got the attention of Wells College. They give leadership scholarships if you're like excelling in extracurricular activities, which I was doing debate because my best friend Natalie's dad was a lawyer and like really wanted her to do mock trial and debate so she could go to a good school. And she roped me into it, so I ended up competing in debate and mock trial and, you know, winning awards for doing that, even though I never saw myself as ever getting involved in politics or becoming a lawyer or anything like that. And so I was just doing it because my friends were there. But it got me a scholarship as a junior, sophomore, and then I was like, okay, I should look into this school. I ended up going because it was the only affordable option. I took this class with a professor because I went in, this is the nephew, by the way. I went in thinking, like, I need to spend the money that my parents are spending to, like, get me there, like, drive me there, get me stuff for my dorm, pay the remaining tuition that wasn't covered by Pell Grants or scholarships, and it was a lot of pressure I put on myself. And I remember hearing from the upperclassmen, this professor is so tough. He is, I wouldn't take his class if I were you. I would wait until you have some more classes under your belt before you try it. And I was like, sold. I'm taking Takumbi's class. And by the way, that's his first name. I was calling him Professor Lumumba Kasongo. He is Professor Lumumba Kasongo to you. He is Takumbi to me. So I'm in his class. It goes very well. I end up getting an A. I try really hard, and he has taken notice of my work. And he says, you're a very good student. You should consider like the concentration in international studies. I say, okay, I'm into that. I'm going to do it. And we're buds. I end up skipping out on the first semester of sophomore year. I decide to work. My parents were like, this is really expensive. Pell Grants are not here anymore. I don't know if we can swing this. I work as a waitress. Takumi says, if you come back, you can be my teaching assistant. This will take some money off of your tuition. It's a way for you to make money while you're in school and still have the working hours, not take away from your studies, but add to them because it's stuff within your major. And he really is the reason I finished school and went to grad school. Just super influential. His approach to teaching is fascinating, despite the fact that his uncle was Patrice Lumumba and was killed by the CIA. Patrice started off as like a beer salesman. He would go door to door and talk to people and sell them beer. And he was good at this job. And then he used these skills to talk about the issue of Belgium colonial rule. Now, Belgium and King Leopold, who was horrible, they were extracting rubber mostly from the Katanga region of Congo, known as Zaire at the time. And the automobile industry was booming, right? It's the 50s. Things are going well. They need rubber. They need these tires, and they need it cheap. So cheap that they depend upon slave labor. The American car industry has stake in this. It wasn't an American company that was manufacturing these tires at the time. They were like French and I think English companies. But basically, it's Belgium colonial rule that's allowing this to happen, depending on slave labor of people in Congo. Patrice is talking to people about this. This isn't right. We shouldn't be living like this. We shouldn't be living under colonial rule. This is our country. Why are these Europeans here taking all of our resources, using our labor? We have a right to this. And they fight for independence under Patrice's organizing, it's going well. He wins independence. He becomes the first democratically elected leader, and he is trying to get Belgium out. They want to hang on to the very rubber-rich region of Katanga. Now, it's the Cold War, so there's all of these tensions abroad, and Russia and the US are just basically beefing about what kind of an economy every other country should have. It's none of their business. They care deeply about it because they've made it their business. Literally, their multinational corporations are depending on the exportation of cheap materials and the cheap labor within countries. That's the United States. Russia is saying, no, every country needs to have, this sort of socialism style of an economy. And they're spreading that doctrine. So there's a Cold War. And Patrice says, hello, United States. You tell everyone you're all about freedom. You love the idea of self-determination, right? That's your whole thing. Now, the world history of what the United States has really gotten up to in terms of imperialism, that news hasn't made it totally everywhere yet in a meaningful way. We know that the United States came and helped Cuba to fight for independence from Spain, but many people don't know that the United States then tried to take Cuba as a colony right afterwards. And so if we hear the United States is all about freedom and democracy abroad, it kind of makes sense for a young leader like Patrice to say, hey, can you help us get Belgium out? The United States says no to that suggestion by Patrice. And instead, he says, okay, well, maybe the Russians can help me somehow with my Belgium problem. He talks to the Russians. You're a global power. Can you help me at all with this problem? They're not making a major deal, nothing like that, but the United States finds out that Patrice has appealed to Russia and says, it looks like you are a communist leader. You're trying to bring your nation in with Soviet rule. Couldn't be further from the truth. He wants independence. He wants the people of Congo to be free. Now, he is told by a very good friend, Kwame Nkrumah, to lay low. He does not. He ends up getting kidnapped and taken into the forest, and there's all kinds of stories as to what really happened. But we know, thanks to declassified CIA documents, that the CIA was involved in some way, that there was an order for Patrice Lumumba to be killed. And then he was. And this is one of those really stark cases where it's not that the CIA got some other guy, fomented discontent among the people, riled them up, made it seem like there was an uprising organically within a country to get some leader out. That's what they had done over and over again. This time they just straight up killed him. It's incredible to learn that my, dad's dad worked for IBM. No one in my family has college degrees, by the way, and my dad's dad died young, so he was, really smart and uniquely in the corporate world. Comparing him to everyone else in my family, very different stories. I never met him, so I couldn't ask, but IBM in the 50s and 60s was basically the CIA. So I talked to someone who focuses on CIA history about this, and he confirmed that a lot of the people in IBM were involved in the CIA. Now, mysteriously, my dad has a birth certificate that says he was born in Cyprus, which was one of the largest CIA bases of the time, to conduct operations in Africa. I found this out years after graduating college, so I couldn't ever talk to Takumi about this. And maybe I should now, but anyway. So me and my sister found this to be incredibly weird because my parents didn't really ever think anything of it. And we, of course, are like, what a great mystery that your birth certificate says this. This is not like a minor mistake. Like they meant to put his hometown and accidentally put Greece? That's not a field that comes up in the Norwalk Hospital in Connecticut. Accidentally. So anyway, we have lots of questions, and my father tells the story of his dad dying, and men in suits just showed up and took his computer and all of his paperwork very quickly after he had passed. And the family was made whole. They were made sure everything was okay. They were well taken care of. He had a good life insurance policy or whatever. But how odd that they all came in quickly. Now, the story we know is that he worked on the first ATM machines, money computers. And he traveled all around the world and nearly moved to Japan and was always in and out of the airport. And my dad tells this story all the time, that he had just gotten his learner's permit. His dad had a drinking problem. That's why he died so young. His dad came home at like sunrise, pretty hammered. The car was already a little beat up. And he says, "You gotta take me to JFK," which is like a 45-minute drive. And my dad's like, "Okay." Oh, we're doing thumbs up. My dad says, "Okay, I guess we're going to JFK." And drives his father there, and he's thinking to himself, I guess I can make my way back, and if I hit something, I can just say it was Dad, because he probably won't remember, and the car's already beat up. And so, my grandfather was always traveling, worked for IBM, which shared staff with the CIA in many ways, and worked out of the office that potentially killed my mentor's uncle. This part is unconfirmed, right? This theory that I have of the weird familial connection. And like how random that I end up going to this school like 5 hours from home that only has like 500 kids, and then I meet Takumbi and we get along so well. And Takumbi's whole way of teaching, he doesn't say this is my observation. Of course it has to be shaped. We're all shaped by our family trauma. Of course it's shaped by that. He doesn't address this in class, although it's come up, right? He lectures on international studies. There have been times where we are watching a documentary and there is a reference to the killing of Patrice Lumumba. I concentrated in African studies to study under him because he was an expert in African studies and he was the chair of the International Studies Department. That's why I ended up going and studying abroad in South Africa. He thought I should learn Spanish and go to South America. I was like, no, I want to learn from you. You're an expert on this, literally. I'll concentrate in African studies. And it's interesting that he doesn't speak on it. And it has to do, I think, with this philosophy that I've observed from him of educating. He never preached any sort of political doctrine to me. He only taught me by the book, the textbook, what definitions of words were and how they fit in to what has happened, what history shows, what is going on politically in countries. And so because he has this approach of just this is what's happened, he makes his students, myself included, very resistant to any propaganda. You are resistant to propaganda through good education. And when I was out a political organizer knocking doors, like Patrice Lumumba once did, and I was talking to them about the Bernie Sanders campaign, about how corporations are running America and we've got to do something about this, I remember thinking, people aren't ready to hear this. And there's a lot of teaching about how a country is not ready for change until the majority of people have opened up to what's going on, what the problem is. They've seen where the corruption is. They've seen who has set up systems in a way that is bad for working people. They know who the elites are. And right now we're not there. There's so much conspiracies about some secret group of evil guys. They're just in the news. They do cable news hits. We know who these people are. And so because the public in America still, to no fault of their own, because they went to American public schools and learned the propaganda from day one, they're still very susceptible to hearing a story told by a politician or the news, which is owned by corporate media, so we hear stories towards a particular lens for a reason. We're still susceptible to the narratives they tell us. From a young age, we're told in the stories of America, good guys and bad guys, superheroes and villains, old westerns where there is a clear superhero and a clear villain, even if they look like regular guys. We're always told these convenient stories that shape how we see the world. And so when we hear in the news, Israel is such a great state. The leader of Israel is fighting for salvation for Jewish people who have been subject to so much persecution, and this is going to be their safe haven, and we must protect Israel because we're the good guys who won World War II. We hear that narrative and we say, yes, okay. And of course these other people are just terrorists. When in reality, if we were to learn the real history, we would learn that the United Nations established Israel as a state for Jewish people to go to on land that belonged to Palestinians. And then through the Nakba, Palestinians were kicked out of their homeland. And when we understand that context, well, it is a bit of a different story now when we hear about the violence in the Middle East. But because of how the American mind is groomed in our education system, we don't think about it like that. And because of the stories of our dominant culture, why would we? Of course, there's a clear good guy and a clear bad guy, and it's not that complicated. And so imagine being Tukumbi. Imagine being someone whose country established democracy on its own, fought its colonial rule, had someone related to you brilliantly organize the country into freedom, and then have it all taken away by the CIA because they want more money and more stuff. That's gotta shape your worldview so deeply. And despite all of this that would point to anger, he's one of the most peaceful people I've ever met. And he has dedicated his life to just educating people. And so how do we reform a brainwashed mind? I would say educate someone. I showed up to Wells, a product of one of the worst schools in my state. And despite not expecting to go to school, not paying attention, and even more so being susceptible to the propaganda we're taught, I was one of those kids that was like, yeah, illegal immigrants shouldn't be taking our jobs. And yeah, people are poor because they don't work hard. I believed the lies that led working people to make decisions against their self-interest in supporting that kind of a narrative. And so when I showed up to Wells, I was absolutely brainwashed by propaganda. I thought we're the greatest country in the world, and every other country looked up to us. And thanks to this approach of just educating, just showing people facts, giving them the space to learn the information, grapple with it on their own, and come to their own conclusions, it's extremely powerful. And if this guy, who I think, intentionally made me learn this lesson, but who seeks peace and the most peaceful way to achieve, the highest ends for people, right? We have to educate everyone. We can't fight the power unless we know what we're fighting. It wouldn't make any possible sense to try and organize people into any kind of a movement in the United States without getting people on the same page first. And so as much as I see what's going on and I see people organizing and building things, I know in my heart of hearts that the fight is really in spreading information. So we know who to be mad at, why we're mad, what to fix, where the problems are. And I think in a lot of other countries, I've talked about this before, where inequality has gotten so bad and people who are poor are cast aside and treated horribly, and they have nothing to lose and they're susceptible to violence. There's been so many violent uprisings because of economic inequality. I think Tukumbi intentionally had me cover the lecture on the Rwandan genocide because he thought I really needed to learn it, because you don't really know something unless you can teach it to others, and teach it to others in simple terms. That's really important, because Tukumbi, English is his second language. It's like his fourth or fifth, to be honest, but he speaks in simple terms because he's accustomed to speaking another language. He doesn't use the regular vocabulary that most professors use, but you cannot truly explain something you don't truly know something unless you can explain it in simple terms. And you can't explain something to be understood by others unless you use words they already know. Of course, that seems obvious, but for some reason I've had professors use the most alienating language that is just like deeply entrenched in their school of thought or their subject. And to be a good teacher, you need to say things in a way that everyone can understand. And I get so many comments on my videos that like, oh, I didn't understand this thing about economics until you said it that way. I think that's because I learned from Takumbi to use simple words. And a lot of what I teach is in some ways regurgitations of things he's taught me. And so I think that's important. And when I lectured on the Rwandan genocide, I had to put words to something that's so tragic. And of course, everyone looks back on the Rwandan genocide and thinks there should have been interventions, there should have been ways to stop it. But if you really understand the genocide, yes, peacekeeping troops may have helped, but there was deep hatred that was sown among two groups of people in a very intentional way. And in the end, no one won. And I think about the United States and how Elon Musk tweets things like, we're destined for civil war. And I hear people talk about like the division in the country. But I don't think we have the kind of rhetoric that can turn American against American. So I think about people who want a revolution. That would bring so much instability. And talking to the Sandinistas. So in 1979, there was the Sandinista Revolution. Ronald Reagan and his boys, again, thumbs up. Ronald Reagan said, we're not going to get involved. But of course, a bunch of Republicans in Congress did get involved. The Iran-Contra scandal, they ended up sending weapons to fund the Contras, the far-right group, to overthrow the Sandinistas. That was a whole nightmare, a mess. And this really interesting thing happened when I was in graduate school. My mentor was Stephen Kinzer, who specializes in American imperialism. And so Stephen's cool. Stephen helped organize this coming together of Contras and Sandinistas and reporters and UN ambassadors who were in Nicaragua in 1979 to talk about what had happened. It must have been 40 years later, because it was 2019, so 40 years later. And I was there. He was like, you want to come? I was like, obviously, yes. And it's so interesting to hear them reflect on how it happened. And there were indigenous leaders there who said, we had everything we needed. And we didn't want to join forces with the Sandinistas because we had our own food. We had our own water. We didn't need anything from them. And they responded by burning the trees to make us pick sides so that we had to depend on power to meet our most basic needs. And that as a concept was super interesting. But also hearing the Sandinistas apologize and that was the wrong thing to do and that we were trying to bring about a world where people had what they needed. We had greedy people hoarding the resources and we needed to end that so that everyone could live a happy and prosperous life. That's what we were fighting for. And through paranoia that now American weapons are being used, now potentially the CIA is being involved, we have to protect this, we have to make sure everyone picks sides, it just devolved into chaos. And so I think Takumbi knows that we live in a world where you have this power that is the United States, and they have so much money and so much resources to defend the endless accumulation of wealth. And they're willing to end nations over getting as much wealth as they possibly can. And knowing that that's real, we have to make decisions in that context. So if America is just going to quash any major movement for changing the world order, the only real way we can begin to challenge the world order, begin to challenge this kind of unfettered, runaway, capitalistic, authoritarian economy is to teach people so that they're resistant to propaganda, because education's the only thing that will make them resistant. So I learned a lot from him. He really shaped the way I view the world, and I think that's why I'm skeptical of myself becoming a content creator on TikTok, which was a platform where if a video was entertaining, any video can pop up on someone's feed, right? I still get videos that have 1-2 likes. It's not someone I follow, it's just random. If I watch that whole video, the algorithm says, this is a good video, it's worth watching all of it. If I like it, even more so, they'll show it to more people. So you can go from no followers, no presence, to a big presence, because the algorithm will let anyone come through. So I started making videos about CIA propaganda and what's going on in the American economy and all of these things. And before there were any sort of guardrails for political content, I was getting views on this. I find it interesting. That's what I'll say. That immediately after gaining a platform of my own, I was invited to go be a talking head on the news. Oh, you can give news commentary and political commentary because you're good at talking. That in itself is a bit of a waste of someone's time. I'm not saying that contextualized news and news commentary is not a worthwhile endeavor. It is. But someone like me, who has a knack for education, who loves teaching, who cares deeply about history, my time spent talking, making repeated points, in many cases, about what's going on right now, what's going on right now, what's going on right now. Something that Stephen Kinzer says is what's really important is what happened yesterday and what's likely to happen tomorrow. And I do feel suspicious that people like me and Brianna Joy Gray, right after she got a huge platform as the press secretary for the Bernie campaign, she got roped into a job doing news commentary where all day your energy is spent, especially in the case of Rising on the Hill, where it's a right chair and a left chair and you have to argue your points about what you think about the news. That's exhausting. You don't have a lot of time to do the good educating work. I think it could be intentional. Even if it's not intentional, it does have the effect of wasting a very effective communicator's time and bringing her into a part of the media atmosphere that's very toxic and very draining. And I think that's a big reason why I didn't see myself staying in just straight up news commentary, because I think it's serving a purpose that I don't see as like the highest end for me to just be talking about the news all day. I want people to understand the news. I want people to be resistant to propaganda. I don't want there to be more Patrice Lumumbas in the world, right? I have a lot of core beliefs that are deeply rooted in the education that I have. And I decided after leaving school that I wanted to educate other people of the same stuff. And so I think more and more that's what I want to use my platform to do. And I don't know if we want to do that as like, let's do a course where we have like, you know, the YouTube videos are like, all right, we're going to do a lesson. We're going to talk about this thing, like a lecture, whatever. There can be readings going with it. I don't know if we could do something like that, but I think at least putting out videos that I think are educating is how I want to spend the majority of my time. So I'm trying really hard to be in a place that when my grant for my position at Dropsite this year finishes up in September, that I can be independent and I can do the teaching and education work. So that's going to be hard. It's going to be a lot of work. And that's why I'm building the YouTube and doing work on the weekends every single week so that we can achieve that goal. Because I see it as a we. Because there are so many of you who have been a part of this since the very beginning, since I started making those videos, before I got whisked away into the world of news commentary. And I do find it interesting. In a weird way. Why would a corporation... Okay, just rock with me for a second. Why would a corporation want me in front of a camera talking to a bunch of people? Especially a show like Rising, where there's a lot of independent people in the audience. Well, they brought me on, and it didn't have that much reach. Their solid audience was mostly independents, people outside of the political spectrum, but people who were politically engaged nonetheless, people who were pretty staunchly in their views. It definitely is something where I'm not educating working people. I'm talking to people who are like libertarians and independents. it felt like a waste of my time in terms of building a world that I want to live in, building a movement, educating working people about what is going on. Because when I was in school, I would go and sit in the attic part of the library, which was near the philosophy section. And when I finished my work, as a little treat, this is how much of a nerd I was, I would go and pick a little philosophy book and read it. And I remember reading Plato's Allegory of the Cave, which is very famous. Makes sense that I randomly picked it up because there's probably a telling and translation of that a bunch of times on the philosophy shelf. So it's about people sitting in a cave, right? They are looking straight on to a rock wall. Behind them is fire. And in front of the fire, but still behind them, is people holding up wooden sticks of different figures, like animals, lions, whatever. And so all these people know, sitting in the cave, they're strapped straight on, only looking at the shadows. They think that's everything. They think that's the whole world. That's everything that's there. That is how they make decisions. That is how they talk about life. And so what if one of the people were to break free and get up and go outside? Well, first their light would burn them. They'd be like, what is all of this? And then their eyes would adjust to the sunlight after being in the darkness for so long. They would see that there's a whole world out there. And the story is basically, don't those people have an obligation to go on and tell the people in the cave, this isn't everything. There's a whole world out there. They're lying that this is all there is for us. That's kind of how I see my whole education and what I do now is in the context of that I have to do this because it's right. Because I used to be sitting in that cave and other people are sitting in that cave and they can't be sitting in that cave, which may be silly. They could be perfectly happy in that cave. Of course they are. Of course they're going to be like, what are you doing? Why are you ripping me away? Oh, it's so bright out here. Oh, I hate this. But then they realize there's much more out there. And that's why I don't like when people call the people in the cave stupid. Imagine saying you're stupid for thinking there's all those animals. All they've ever seen is those animal shadows. What do you mean they're stupid for that? That's where I'm coming from when I said the Trump thing, which I think some people didn't watch that last video and then commented, like, why are you saying I can't call Trump supporters stupid? And if you haven't seen that, my last YouTube video, I said don't call Trump supporters stupid. I gave a lot of context as to why I was saying that, and it still had so many people in the comments calling Trump supporters stupid. And I hope one day they will have the heart to watch the video. I see them as people in the cave as well. So, moving on. What was your major and what did you do your thesis in if you went that route? So, undergrad, international studies, political science. I thought that if you studied political science, you could become a lawyer. And then I interned at a law firm and I hated it, but I learned political science. I took a lot of classes in philosophy and economics because Takumi was like, yeah, these classes are relevant. He kind of helped me figure out in my double major with a small school and so much overlap, like what courses would I take to meet requirements for a double major. I did my political science thesis on the prison system in the United States in a humanitarian context, right? So judging the US prison system by the rules and regulations of the United Nations human rights charters. And basically, it's not looking so good. And then my other thesis for international studies was about the Economic Freedom Fighters Party. I just studied abroad in South Africa. And everyone was talking about the EFF like, oh, who are these crazy guys? They're stupid. Trevor Noah famously called them stupid in his stand-up, said they can't do math or something to that effect. They are a workers' party of people who are very unhappy with the direction the country has gone because a lot of the promises of Nelson Mandela post-apartheid have not been made good on. And a lot of people who have gone into the highest office with the African National Congress, Mandela's party, have been very corrupt, have made neoliberal compromises and enriched themselves. And there's been class division even among people who are struggling to be fully equal members of society in South Africa still. So I noticed that the ANC was failing in a lot of ways. And there are some parallels to the parties in the United States, but the African National Congress called in militarized police at one point to end a strike of miners. Now, miners in South Africa, it's like diamond mining. Some of the dust causes intense lung issues. People die extremely young. The working conditions are abysmal. The wages are abysmal. And so there was a huge miners' strike. And Julius Malema always shows up and gives speeches. He was a leader within the African National Congress Youth League. And then the ANC sent in militarized police and they shot the miners that were protesting. And so my thesis was basically, based on the data we see from Americana, where this happened, people started voting EFF in this area. They saw that the ANC wasn't fighting for workers or black or colored South Africans. They were aligned with the state, which now had an alignment with the corporate class in a very neoliberal way. And so my prediction was that we are going to see the EFF grow in coming years as the ANC continues to fall and be subject to corruption and not make good on the promises. And wherever we see actions like this, where the ANC fails to be on the side of workers in conflict, the EFF will grow their vote share in that area. And so that ended up being very true. I wish I had published it because it's very true. And it's interesting that I came out with this thesis when I considered myself like a more conservative independent in America. I still had such a blind spot for American politics despite having this really radical idea in South Africa of what politics are like and could be like. And then when I was in graduate school, I studied data-driven policy. And my thesis, I had to do like a sort of like a capstone project where we can demonstratively see that the Rhode Island police force is not using data correctly or something like that. It was not a big thesis. And so yes, I did study political science. It's not just a hobby or passion. I was in the textbooks, and it's so funny when I talk to people about the American political spectrum, and I'm like, well, liberal is a very technical term to describe a specific ideology. It's not like left extreme, right extreme, and this is more liberal. Liberal is a specific thing with a specific definition. People talk to you like, well, no, it's not. There is a very real term for what it means to be a liberal. These are people who do not oppose the demise of capitalism. They believe in upholding systems. They believe in free markets. They believe in yes, democracy, but they believe in a very specific free market capitalist economy. So you can't say you're getting more liberal when you go to people who are anti-capitalist, you know? And so neoliberalism is also a technical term where it's really using sort of democratic principles to fight for the privatization of public goods. And it's sort of using this idea of freedom to make the case for that. So it seems like something that is, we need to have better deliverance of these public goods, so privatizing them will make them better, when really all it does is erode them. And so it's so interesting that, people just don't think that there is an objective truth of what a liberal is. They're like, well, that's your opinion, that a liberal is that. Everyone is questioning what any degree means and what you've been taught. It's a time where no matter how much of your personal time you've spent on something, people question you. I was just talking to the guy down at the nursery to get trees for the backyard. We've been doing so much landscaping. And he says people come and they show them the Google AI reverse image search is like, oh, this tree is this. And he's like, that's not that. That's a whatever. Spring snow crab apple tree. And they'll be like, okay, so you've seen this tree in real life? Yes. He literally said this to someone. Okay, let me go show you a tree and you can tell me if it's the same one. Yeah. She looks at it. Yeah, that's the same tree. He says, that is this. That is not what Google told you. You can see the tag. It's right there. That is this kind of tree. Google is wrong. And it's so weird that people believe like an AI that was recently created and is not good at sorting information over someone who's been doing this for years and years and years. But I think people are skeptical of everything because if you can't trust the news, if you can't trust institutions, who can you trust? And so it's a crisis of information. Who is your favorite band/artist? The Grateful Dead. I have Tiger from Jerry Garcia's Tiger guitar. I have Wolf from the Wolf guitar. I'm not getting Alligator because I just don't want... I draw the line. I like how the tiger looks. I like how the wolf looks. They look cool. I think a huge part of tattoos is they need to look nice. Sure, they can have meaning, But mostly, you're going to have this as an accessory on every single outfit you ever wear if that part of your skin is showing, so you should like it. What does the ka mean? So some people say ka. No, my name is Jessica. Ka, like cuddle, cousin. Ka. You don't say Jessica. Jessica. My mom has always called me Ka since I was a little kid. Instead of Jess, just the last syllable instead of the first. Ka. And I don't think it's that complicated, but it really trips people up because I don't think a lot of people use the last syllable as a nickname. I invite more Jessicas to do so, okay? Welcome to the Ka train. When I first started doing TikTok, there was the community is what many people refer to themselves as in the comment section. How do you stay positive in the midst of democracy being dismantled? I'm going to end on this one. I think it ties into a lot of what I've been talking about because I love teaching and educating. It's so fun to watch someone go from a place of like, well, I'll never understand this. Why is it like this? To, oh my God, I get this and I see how it applies to my life and I can use this. That's very rewarding to me because it felt good for me to go through that process of learning, and teaching should be fun. It shouldn't be hard. I think we have a crisis of teachers being paid so little, so people end up with not great teachers and then learning isn't enjoyable. It should be. And so I see what is going on and it's horrible, right? I watch the news, horrible things, but these are very precedented times. This has happened before. We have had people in the streets fighting for their very civil rights and civil liberties. And the Constitution is not perfect. Trump violating the Constitution, bad, yes, but could we use a new Constitution? I think so. I think it was written a long time ago, and a lot of what's in there is incredibly outdated. I think the will of the people is not protected when, constitutionally, you can have corporations donating millions and millions of dollars on, behalf of what they want to have happen in their business to PACs and to candidates so that they can have regulations rolled back so they can sell us stuff that's poisonous to us and they can make a bunch of money. That's all constitutional. There should be laws against that. There should be laws against the top 1% having 30% of the wealth in the country. And so I think we need a stronger constitution. I think we need a constitution with economic principles in it. And so that's all to say. These are precedented times. We've been in situations like this before, where our country is in crisis and groups are being treated terribly by the government and people aligned with the government, who the government will protect. And so, because I see this as an issue of the ideas need to be in the hearts of minds of the people before change comes, and myself enjoying education, I have to enjoy every day where I do that. And today I had this sort of mini little freak out where I was like, I don't want to make content about the news, but I'm having a hard time bringing myself to get in front of the camera to talk about anything other than what's happening in LA. How can we possibly have intentionally incite protests to be so horrible, to go to people who are going to immigration court hearings who are trying to legally migrate and then detain them when I was sitting across the desk from conservatives this entire election cycle who said, we only care about illegal immigration, only illegal immigration, only illegal immigration. We do not have a problem with people who are trying to cross the border legally, by people who are trying to migrate to this country legally, and then you have ICE detaining people who are going through the legal process. It just becomes so clear that this is really about ethnicity. It's about the countries they come from. It's about who they are and the language they speak and what they represent culturally, which is disgusting to think someone is worth less because of where they come from and who they are. And so of course people are going to go to the streets over that. When you start crossing that line that you said you wouldn't cross, you're losing the consent of the governed, and so they have a right to protest. And yeah, I see people in the streets throwing tear gas, getting hit by rubber bullets, and knowing that this is intentional, that Donald Trump wants full control, wants a surveillance state, that the billionaires that supported his campaign and the people who support Palantir want a full militarized authoritarian state. He looks up to other authoritarians. He is forming a database of all of our identities, which has made very upset the people within his party that want small government. He clearly wants the opposite of that, and we've seen this tactic before of we need to foment violence and discontent and make them take extreme actions so the government can say, this is for your safety, this is for law and order that we're doing this. It's all intentional. It's very similar to Andor, Gorman. If you haven't watch. Maybe I'll do some videos on that. But it felt weird in a time where that's happening to talk about something, of course, related, but to not talk about that. Like, I should be talking about that. Maybe not enough people know. But of course, it's flooding all of our timelines. I don't need to be regurgitating that. But after doing the news like that for 2 years, there's a bone in me, an impulse in me that I'm like, I have to do it. But I don't. I can stay focused on my plan and talking to you all and establishing this platform where we can do this sort of re-education and realignment in our brains and hearts and minds together. So yeah, that's what was on my mind. And yeah, I like these Q&A sessions. I think these chats are important because everyone wants to trust who they get information from. And I think that people are sick of the buttoned up way of getting information, of like, oh, I have to sit in a lecture hall, I have to, dress in a normal outfit, I can't be at home with my snacks and my comfies on. I think education in a really conversational tone through storytelling is how it used to happen. Oral history used to be the main way humans communicated their history. It's kind of in our psyche to get information like this about the world in a conversational way. And so I think this is better than me doing that. I enjoy it more, and I hope to keep doing it. If you're interested in this idea of a course, I'm very curious as to what you think. Let me know in the Instagram DMs and in the comment section here. If you're unaware of where the Q&A is coming from, follow me on Instagram. You can ask questions. You can ask questions on there. I've been doing these like once a week-ish, so be a part of the conversation. Excited to see your comments and what you think about all of this. Until next time. Okay, love you, bye.